We are going to geek out a little today with our next guest, Menno Henselmans. So grab your paper and pen for this one. Menno started his career as a business consultant, but his passion for science and fitness turned him into an international public speaker, a scientific researcher, and an educator. Now, his works have been published in over a dozen languages, and his website was ranked #1 fitness website by the Huffington Post. Currently, Menno is a reviewer in the Cambridge University's Research Science Society Mini PhD Program 2023 and a scientist for the International Scientific Research Foundation for Fitness and Nutrition. He's also a board member of the Institute of Nutrition and Fitness Sciences, INFS, of India, and Fitzonder Fables in the Netherlands. He created the Henselmans Personal Training Certification Program, which is a PT course, which is not only available in English, but also translated for you into Dutch, Spanish, French, and German. He's a best-selling author on Amazon with his book, The Science of Self-Control, which we're going to talk about in the context of an older woman on this podcast today. All of his content is based on science, but also on years of experience in health and fitness. And so you can see that really Menno is pretty qualified to speak about all things food and exercise. And he has a great Instagram account, which I love following, but so do 130,000 others. He's also got really interesting YouTube videos and a Twitter and Facebook account where you can find tens of thousands of other people there too. And I'll have links to all of these in the show notes. So now, without further ado, let's meet Menno Henselmans. Welcome.
Thank you very much. That's a comprehensive introduction.
Oh, I hope I got it all right, because you did a lot. And I think I kind of left out some of the stuff, but I just couldn't keep it all in.
Yeah, it's always hard to say, like, what do you do? Well, I do a number of things.
Yeah, you do a lot. And I'm really excited to bring all of this knowledge into one space for the women going through this menopause transition. And you do a ton of research, but you're also applying it in the real world, which is really kind of rare. You're not just studying, but you're using it and seeing how the results are happening with women and men in the gym and in their real lives. So tell us what you're finding when women, what do you say that you see when through your clients, for example, when they pass through that menopause transition, like what happens to their bodies, the muscle mass and the body fat percentage, and are they training any differently? Are they having different outcomes than, say, their younger selves or their younger counterparts, or different from the guys in the gym?
I think there is a large negative mental effect in particular. Obviously, with age, most things don't improve. They get a bit harder. But I think many people dramatically overestimate this effect. With women, it is true more so than with men that there is a more sudden effect. With men, it's very gradual. But with women, menopause is something that's very much there. You really get noticeable symptoms in most cases. And of course, you notice that you stop menstruating or it becomes irregular at first. So I think due to these factors, for a lot of women, there's kind of a signal that, oh, this is the end. And that really is not the case. If you look at the scientific research on what happens for muscle growth, fat loss, all these things, yes, the hormonal changes don't work in your favor, but overall, if you look at studies of older women versus younger women that do strength training, they actually gain very similar amounts of muscle mass and strength. You can lose similar amounts of fat. Typically, older women do have to go a little bit lower in energy intake, but as long as you do that, appetite also goes down, so it's not that much more difficult. They get similar fat loss as well. So most outcomes in the end are actually quite similar, and the most important thing by far is that you keep exercising, including strength training to preserve muscle mass, and you stick to a good, healthy diet.
Interesting. Because sometimes, I mean, we often hear, not always, that women find it so much harder to build muscle mass. They say they say their diet hasn't changed, their exercise hasn't changed, and they hear about their hormones changing, and perhaps estrogen, the loss of estrogen is not helping with the muscle building like it used to. And so they're feeling that they have to work harder with it, but with so much effort, not as much change is happening. And I'm wondering if with your female clients who are passing through this, do you notice that?
To some extent, yes. Well, I'm also a big proponent of hormone replacement therapy, which you'll probably want to touch on later. And that offsets a lot of any negative effects that there are. There is actually direct research showing that hormone replacement therapy, in particular estrogen, something that includes estrogen for women, augments muscle growth in menopausal women or postmenopausal women. So there is definitely an effect there. I think in practice, it appears worse than it is because you get the effects of menopause and then also the effect of being inherently more advanced. So regardless of whether you're going to age 20 to 25 or 45 to 50, it's 5 years of additional training experience. And the more advanced you become in terms of as a trainee, the harder it also gets to gain more muscle and more strength.
Mm. Do you notice any of the changes in women when they move, say, from more cardio-centric exercises to more strength training exercises, that they're getting better body compositions when they're passing through this transition, or women in general? I don't know what you're seeing.
Definitely. And I think a lot of women find that, especially women that have good genetics, they find, some cardio, a yoga class here and there, and they maintain a good body composition. But then when they get older, it becomes a lot more difficult, and they find that strength training becomes very beneficial to maintain and even improve their body composition. At a younger age, maybe just, like I said, cardio is enough. But as you get older, strength training is almost a necessity, I would say, to go, especially into the 80s, 90s levels, with a good level of muscle mass and staying very healthy. Muscle mass is, I think, very underrated for health because we see now actually a recent paper on Canada, just as an example, estimated that the yearly cost attributable to low muscle strength in Canada, which is mostly in older people, of course, well, amounted to 2 billion per year.
Wow.
And that's yes, and that's because low muscle mass increases the risk of type 2 diabetes dramatically. It decreases your metabolic rate, and in particular, decreased insulin sensitivity, greater insulin resistance, is strongly associated with greater inflammation because it promotes the formation of advanced glycation end products, and they're strongly linked. So the more muscle you have, the better your insulin sensitivity, and typically the lower your level of inflammation. And typically it also becomes a lot easier to maintain lower body fat levels because muscle mass keeps your metabolism up. And of course, training burns energy to begin with. So it has a lot of effects that become, with strength training, it spirals into a lot of other positive effects. But if you don't do these things and you start losing muscle mass as you age, then it spirals into a lot of negative effects. So it starts with, okay, I'm losing some muscle mass. Fine, that's one thing, but then you get insulin resistance, it becomes worse, then you get chronic inflammation, and then you get a whole host of other things, and combine that with symptoms of menopause, things can go downhill very quickly, but they can also improve very quickly.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, you mentioned the insulin sensitivity, because generally what's shown out there is as you go through the menopause experience, women tend to, not all of them, tend to become more insulin resistant, meaning we can't eat as many types of certain foods as we used to, in terms of those maybe highly refined carbohydrates that we seem to be able to get away with before. And now we're like, well, what's going on? And that's what it means to the insulin resistance. So building more muscle, to sort of recap, will help with that, as well as a lot of women who are getting older were concerned about losing the muscle mass because we don't want to have foals, or we don't want to become frail, and we may have parents who are already experienced sarcopenia, that age-related muscle mass loss, and maybe had a fall, and then things can really spiral out of control from there as well, on top of the insulin resistance, on top of not being able to carry on groceries, on top of just so many other problems. So it's pretty important to keep the muscle mass, but it's just, for women, it seems to be harder than it is for a guy, saying the same age, between the ages of 45 and 60. We kind of go, well, what's going on? What doesn't seem the guys are complaining as much in terms of the effort it takes to build muscle. I don't know if it's the loss of estrogen, or maybe they have more testosterone than women, but certainly, like you've mentioned, it may be an interesting discussion to have with the doctor, to talk about having the hormone therapy. And I'm wondering your thoughts on terms of testosterone for women. Does that help with the muscle mass?
It definitely does. The more testosterone in your body for both men and women, the more muscle mass you get, the more muscle mass you also get from strength training. So there's also an interaction effect. But I think estrogen for most women is more important than estrogen alone has already been shown to augment muscle growth. So estrogen is also what most women lose the most of. The decline in estrogen in menopause is massive, whereas the decline in testosterone level is usually not that large. In fact, there are some women who get slight increases in testosterone after or during menopause. Mostly though, if especially if your health is poor, then there are a lot of downward effects of other hormones decreasing. So then testosterone can also decrease as a result of higher body fat levels, inflammation, and the like. So it depends a lot on how healthy you stay and how physically active you stay. Which is the same for men, by the way, because if men don't stay very active, they also lose their testosterone and get similar negative health effects.
I'm wondering what's the comparison? So if a woman is thinking about, okay, hormone therapy, all right, I'll get on the estrogen. And this goes without saying that you can't just take hormone therapy and expect muscle building. You got to do the work in the gym. You got to eat enough protein and all that. But wondering how much then would she need even to take testosterone if she's really working at the gym, building, how much testosterone can you build from doing strength training or other types of training versus taking a supplemental testosterone? Do you know? I mean, you're the study guy, so that's why I'm asking if you know any studies or just your experience.
It depends a lot on how much testosterone we're talking about, but for women, usually if we're talking about true replacement, which just means that you have very low levels and you increase them a little bit, like compared to guys' levels, because the levels of men are about 15 times higher on average. So even for women to go from the low end to the norm or to the high end of the female reference range is a relatively small effect compared to what men can get, or especially compared to, say, a steroid user. So the effect of testosterone is relatively marginal. It's significant, but it's not going to make or break your diet or training program. And if you have a good training program, a good diet, that's going to net you so much more in terms of results than testosterone. Like if you go on testosterone as a woman, you go to the normal end of the physiological range. Yeah, she'll gain a little bit of muscle mass and some strength, but as you say, it's not going to replace good nutrition and exercise. Whereas if you stay physically active and lean, staying lean is also very important for chronic inflammation, insulin sensitivity, or pretty much anything. Then you probably don't even need the testosterone in the first place, because research also finds that the declines in hormonal levels are strongly associated with the overall level of health. So if you stay very healthy, then you also maintain your hormonal health a lot longer.
That's good to know. Actually, I like that. Since you're the study guy, I mean, your content is so heavy on the science, and anyone who goes to your Instagram or YouTube, you'll see you always bring out new studies, and I find it super interesting how you interpret them. But I wonder, sometimes when I'm reading these, I'm wondering how much this is applying to a woman, especially a woman going through peri or postmenopause. And I don't know if you follow Dr. Stacy Sims. She's an exercise physiologist and nutritionist. You would love her. I think she's very heavy on the science as well. She's best known for this motto she created called "Women are not little men," because in research, at least her research is showing that women say react to different diets and exercise than much differently than men. And she and many other female researchers out there really scream at the top of their lungs that there is just not enough research done on women to make concrete conclusions that keto is great for women too, or intermittent fasting is great for women too. We know that it's done great for men, and this is what they're saying, but I'm not sure how true is this.
It is true that men and women are different, and they also respond a little bit differently to certain aspects, such as the amount of fat in your diet seems to be more favorable for women, like the hormonal positive effects and satiating effects of dietary fat seem better in women than in men. However, I would say that the differences in the grand scheme of things are subtle. If we're talking about the importance of getting enough total protein in, watching your energy intake, doing strength training, staying lean, these things are by far more important than any sex differences between men and women in terms of fine-tuning the exact type of program that people respond better to. One of the most popular articles on my website is 9 reasons why women should not train or train, I think it's train like men. But these are definitely the fine-tuning compared to the fundamentals, right? If, for example, you're worried about whether you should do keto or vegan, but you're not watching your protein or your energy intake, right, then you're going to get much more bang for your buck by paying attention to those things and getting those in check first. And then you can worry about whether you're restricting certain types of carbohydrates or whether you go keto or just low carb or even high carb. These things are definitely secondary to, you know, the pillars.
Oh, we got to go read that article. I'll make a link to that article. I think that'd be interesting. But like you said, those are fine tuning. There was another article that you posted on your Instagram account that I thought was interesting, showing women's cycles don't affect their physical performance unless they think it does. And Dr. Stacy Sims she wrote a really great book called Roar, and it was all about just females and being athletic and training and food and all this. And this really goes against what she and so many other women have been touting for these, you know, for those who still have a cycle. They share that there are times in a woman's cycle that are optimal for building muscle or optimal for resting or better to eat a higher carbohydrate diet. I'm sure you probably heard of this. But this article says something else. And is that just one article? Or are you finding out that's generally the case for most women, and we just got it wrong, or there wasn't not enough study? What's going on here?
It's a slightly complex topic, but overall the research, I would say now, is quite clear that there's not a physiological or at least not a neuromuscular effect on almost any type of performance inherent to the menstrual cycle. Now, that doesn't mean that different women may not have some effect that's semi-random. And there are certainly mental effects that we know for sure. So it can become a lot harder, and of course also practical effects, like some times of the menstrual cycle, it may feel a lot harder to exercise, or you may be less motivated to exercise. And that's also what one of the new studies found, that if you're less motivated to exercise, then of course that can translate into reduced performance. And practical matters, if you're bleeding heavily and you have cramps, then of course it's going to be much harder to do a 8 RM on squats, like maximal effort squats. So there are certainly these practical components, but there's nothing within the actual muscle tissue itself that responds to these hormonal fluctuations, or any effect that there will be is going to be trivial. So that was something that I also changed my mind on, because in one of my first articles on this, I also argued that there is an effect of the menstrual cycle on performance, and that's why it can actually be beneficial to train more interestingly in the follicular phase, is what research initially suggested, which would include menstruation, which is, I think, what a lot of women would not expect, because that's not when you typically feel your greatest. So that's what the initial research kind of trended towards, but it was a weak trend. And there are now a lot more studies have come out, and they're saying, well, any effect that there is essentially random.
Wow. That just goes against everything I learned recently. So it's not necessarily just in our heads or our belief system. It is actually a physiological system too. Women, if they're not, like you said, if they're not feeling motivated, if they're feeling tired because of heavy bleeding or because of some other physiological thing, well, yeah, they're not going to perform well. It's not just in their head. But the article made me almost think about, oh, now that we learn this, sometimes we are looking for that effect. Oh, I heard on Zora's podcast that maybe the week before my period, I may feel like eating more carbs, and I may feel like maybe taking it down a notch. So I will look out for that. And then it's that confirmation bias. Is it that, or is it really that they're really, you know, having these effects? And I wonder how much that is actually influencing somebody's the belief system, affecting their performance in the end. And that's what I think that article is about.
I think there is a lot of confirmation bias for sure. We also see this, for example, with HRV trackers, with people, or the people that track pretty much anything. If you have them track something and really focus on it, then they will come to believe that it has effects on performance, especially if that thing itself, in the case of HRV, for example, it tells you in the morning, okay, your workout is going to suck because your HRV is bad. And then you go to the gym and you're like, well, my workout's going to suck. Probably you're not going to be 100% there mentally. So then you see that your performance is indeed not as good as it was. And then you think, oh, see, it's right. And it's very hard not to think these things, especially with the cultural emphasis on the menstrual cycle. And I think that if you have these beliefs, then it's very easy to think that whenever a workout doesn't go as planned, you think, oh yeah, it's the menstrual cycle. Whereas if you were focused on sleep, for example, you may have thought, oh, it was sleep or stress or just random. Maybe it was the last workout was heavier than used to and you didn't recover as well. So there are a lot of factors. I see this in clients, not just in this case, but in almost everything with nutrition. Some people are just focused on carbohydrates, for example, really heavily. And then they think carbohydrates have a very strong effect on performance, which also research shows it does not.
It doesn't.
No, it's for strength training, there is almost no effect. But it's again one of those things where if you feel like you need carbs or caffeine for that matter, very similar, you see that people start believing it and it kind of becomes its own self-fulfilling prophecy. So combine that with existing practical effects and real differences in motivation and well-being, which can of course influence your training sessions. And I think it makes sense that in general, people think the effects of the menstrual cycle on performance are stronger than we really see in terms of neuromuscular levels.
Well, we have to, it seems as though the science is still behind on women, just research on women, period. And then research on older women, even less, and older adults. I'm a gerontologist and we know there's just not enough research on people over the age of 75, 80, and we need this because the population is aging and hopefully that will change. Do you think it's changing?
Yes, in fact, these last studies on the menstrual cycle were conducted by women because a big reason that women are not used or not invited in many research studies is because of the menstrual cycle, because of the belief that there was that, well, if we get women in the study, then we also have to start controlling for the menstrual cycle. Otherwise, everything is going to be confounded by that. Were they stronger actually because of this supplement, or were they stronger because it was the follicular phase of their menstrual cycle? And that greatly complicates things. So a lot of researchers were like, okay, I want nothing to do with that. We're just going to get men. And these last studies, in large part, were conducted by female scientists to facilitate the entry of far more women in science. Because now that we know these things, now that we know that the menstrual cycle doesn't have any massive effect on performance or no significant effect, smaller than anything that we would be interested in with training volume or whatever we're studying, we can also include women. So it's actually very strongly linked in that sense that these study efforts are in large part fueled by the exact motivation to include more women in exercise science studies, because it's true that women are dramatically underrepresented in research, in part because of this reason, which is not just that scientists don't want to study women or something, but that they used to think, well, it's very complicated with the menstrual cycle.
And then talk about menopause as well. I mean, that's the whole other can of worms as well, when you can't, at least with the menstrual cycle, it's predictable. But imagine studying a woman going through perimenopause when the hormones are absolutely crazy and unpredictable. I don't know how they even will, come up with some confounding factors for that. I don't know how it must be much harder, don't you think?
Yes, I don't have the exact numbers on this available, but I'm quite confident to say that research on perimenopausal women is dramatically lacking for exactly this reason, because it's very tricky. You have a massive confounding factor in the background that is going to change potentially everything, and some women are going to have their going to menopause faster or lose their menstrual cycle faster than others. So if you study perimenopausal women for almost any outcome, then you're going to get a lot of variance in your study. But there is a lot of research on postmenopausal women, and we can compare that to premenopausal women, and then we just have to assume kind of that perimenopausal women are in between. And usually for most outcomes, I think that works out pretty well. But yeah, it's very difficult to do direct research on perimenopausal women.
So then what does a woman going through perimenopause or even postmenopausal do when she reads a research article or hears about a new diet or a new way of training and apply it to herself, knowing that her hormones are just playing tricks on her? You said there wasn't a huge difference when you're cycling, but what would you recommend for a woman to take in that information, and how would she apply it to herself?
I think usually we can assume that the fundamentals, they apply to perimenopausal women, postmenopausal women, premenopausal women, and even men alike. So energy intake, if you want to lose fat, you have to be in energy deficit. That's something that's pretty much a golden rule. And it doesn't matter whether you're 90, female, male, 20, it will apply to anyone. If you want to build muscle, pretty much you will have to do strength training or to prevent sarcopenia. Effort in the gym is also hard to contest. Like you have to work hard. You can do the smartest program in the world, but if you don't train hard, then it's going to be very hard to gain strength and muscle mass.
What does that mean, train hard? Explain, give us a visual.
Close proximity to muscular failure would be the scientific definition. So you do as many reps as you can. And I think that's also a really good general tip, is to pretty much always do as many repetitions as you can or come very close to reaching failure. And a lot of programs that you'll see, especially in magazines, they say like bodyweight squats, 3 sets of 10. That's nonsense, because 3 sets of 10 might be extremely difficult for a sarcopenic 90-year-old woman that can barely get out of her chair. How is she going to do 3 sets of 10 bodyweight squats? But it's maybe super easy for a fit 40-year-old woman that has trained all her life and can do back squats with 100 kilos. So you always have to tweak any program to your current abilities and make sure that for your current abilities, you're training very hard and close to your level of failure. So don't worry about, all of these things where it says this amount of repetitions. Just do as many repetitions as you can. Use a weight that you can lift.
So if they read somewhere that they should do 3 sets of 10 repetitions, then they got to get a heavy enough weight where that 10th, lift is going to be failure. Pretty much, they'll get to the 9th, the 10th will be like, I can't do it. Is that what it looks like?
Yes. And we could go even one step further and say that it probably doesn't even matter if it's exactly 10, because most research finds that as long as you're anywhere in between 5 and 30 repetitions, you're probably good, as long as you're going close to failure. And the outcomes are going to be quite similar. Heavier weights are better for strength development, but for health, overall well-being, and muscle growth, you can go all the way up to 30 repetitions, and it's fine, as long as that for you is close to failure. And I think in particular for peri and postmenopausal women, it is very useful to do high repetition work, because women are inherently better at high repetition work than men. They can typically do more repetitions at a given intensity than men. And it's much less injurious. So one of the biggest factors, I would say, physically, along not just fat loss, muscle growth, all these things, I think a practical factor that actually is more significant for many people, especially when you're talking about serious lifters or athletes, is injuries. Growth hormone levels decrease very rapidly with age. And if you're not on any kind of hormone replacement, you're going to see that in your injury recovery capacity and the ease with which you can strain a tendon, for example. And higher repetitions are a lot easier on the tendons, especially below 70% of your 1RM. The tendon strain level is far lower. And you can often see that people that have injuries or weak body parts or joints, if you do higher repetition work, you can still do so, still go close to failure, still get all the same health benefits, muscle growth, fighting sarcopenia, and you do lose out on a little bit of strength development, but other than that, you get very similar results, and it's much less injurious.
That's really good to know. But it seems as though you may need both. We did a podcast with Simon Hill. I'm not sure if you know him, from Australia. He's an exercise physiologist as well, nutritionist, and he mentioned that that's great. That's the same reasons that you explained, to do some more repetitions for females. But he also said, if you want to combat osteoporosis, to build bone density, you need to have a heavier weight or an impact. What do you think?
Yes, you don't need much though. And as long as you're going close to failure, you can get, especially up to the novice, beginner, intermediate level, you get pretty similar outcomes. When you get more advanced, then it becomes a lot more important to also use heavier weights. But especially if you're just getting into it, you don't have to use heavy weights. Again, as long as you go close to muscular failure. And then, yeah, as you get more advanced, you get to like the intermediate level, then it will definitely be beneficial to also have some heavy strength training in there, even going as low as, say, 5 repetitions, 5 rep max, those kind of things. But you only have to do one set often, and you get a lot of the benefits already, and there's still not a lot of injury risk. And then you can do remaining work for higher repetitions.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I would get both of them. But speaking of injuries, which can happen as we get older or we have a surgery, some of us are very interested in katsu training or blood flow restriction, especially during those times of recovery when we just can't lift heavy weights or we shouldn't be at the gym. What are your thoughts on, I don't know if you know what katsu training is versus blood flow restriction. They're different, but that have sort of similar ideas on katsu training. Just from people don't know, these are these bands that you wear on your arms or your legs, and there's this sort of cycling of filling up with air like a blood pressure cuff and then emptying out, whereas blood flow restriction is really like a tourniquet, glorified tourniquet on your arm, and it stays constant. And they have different contraindications and all that, but the idea is to get more blood flow, to get more growth hormone done. And it actually, the studies that have been shown, that been done on these types of training with people who've been injured or recovering from a surgery, is that they're not losing their muscle mass, which happens so quickly, especially when you're recovering from an injury or have gone through a surgery. What have you found in the research, and perhaps maybe with your clients or people who do use this type of training?
Yeah, so katsu training, as the Japanese originally called it, is very, very useful as a form of low intensity training. So it essentially supercharges the effect of going high in repetitions and using low weights, but doing a lot of repetitions with them, because it induces a lot more metabolic stress, which allows you to use even lower weights and still get similar muscle growth as people training with far heavier weights. So with katsu, you can still do sets of 30, and as long as that's your 30 rep max, so you can only do 30 repetitions with that, that's going to be very lightweight, because 30 repetitions with blood flow restriction, like with one of those tourniquets or a powerlifting rep, it doesn't even matter that much what you use. It can be a very lightweight. And especially when you're injured, or if as prehabilitation you think you might get injured. For example, I have very weak elbows. It's very useful to use the techniques like this, because you can accumulate a lot more work before risking injury.
I love it. I love katsu training. And I was doing blood flow restriction as well, and I saw some really great gains. They're totally different experiences, but as a gerontologist, I'm thinking this is every single older adult who just cannot lift in a heavy weight, because we're telling them to lift heavy weights for against osteoporosis, but they're people who just won't or can't. It's a great alternative. So I would love to see more people using this. You mentioned sarcopenia, and this is the age-related muscle mass loss. Why do you think people lose muscle as they age? Not just women, but men in general.
Yeah, this has been studied quite extensively, and the conclusion is quite surprising, I think. Age per se has almost nothing to do with sarcopenia. Sarcopenia can be explained almost entirely by disuse. So it's not that the muscle is just getting older. They've done experiments like in vitro research where you take muscle tissue of a 90-year-old, or you just let muscle tissue age a lot, and it doesn't change a lot in terms of functional properties or how it adapts to stress, which is mostly mechanical tension placed on it. It adapts to that. It's mostly that as we get older, we get more and more inactive. Whereas what should happen is we should actually get more and more active. The older you get, the more important it becomes to stay fit and also do strength training, because as a young individual, you might get away with not doing strength training. As an older adult, like if you're 80, 90, you can't get away with it. Like you're going to get side effects from that. You're going to get sarcopenia, you're going to get osteoporosis. It's just a matter of time. And that's why strength training is so important for, well, anyone, because the earlier you start, the better, but that's never too late to start.
I'm so glad you said that. This is what I learned in gerontology as well. I was shocked. I was thinking, oh, wow, it really is. We need to move it. If you don't use it, you lose it. And I agree with you 100%. as we age and as we get older, we need to work harder. We need to train more. And when I was growing up, I thought, oh, well, I guess when I get older, I'll take it easy. And people have told me, Zora, you train, a lot. You should take it easy now. And I'm thinking, no, actually, I think it's going to be the opposite away, because from what I'm seeing, I don't want to lose my muscle mass. I want to be strong. I don't want to be frail. I want to be independent, and I want to be able to carry my own groceries and not worry about how far something is away, and I can walk to it at least. But the mobility, the agility, this is just so important. What are your thoughts on how women have dealing with the mobility issues, or maybe injuries, arthritis, recovery? What is the best way to do this for a woman going through the perimenopause and beyond?
I think most things in terms of nutrition and strength training are actually very similar. Like the same core principles apply. One big difference is that I use a lot more high repetition work in elderly clients, because they can accumulate a lot more work without becoming injured. Of course, you have to ease into the program depending on how currently fit the individual is. A 20-year-old, you can just start, throw everything at them, and it's probably going to be fine. But you can't do that with a 90-year-old. So you have to ease into it more. But most research actually finds that as long as they get fit, they can handle a lot of volume, and they respond very well to higher volumes. So the idea that you shouldn't do much work is completely flawed. You should do as much as you can tolerate without getting injured or overtraining. But the actual risk of overtraining is not that large, and it's mostly the injury risk that is a practical limitation to how much volume and how much exercise you can do.
Do you think people are getting more injured? Well, first, does the research show people get more injured as they get older? And if so, why are they getting injured more often?
There is not a lot of direct research on injuries in general. So I don't actually know if there's direct research showing that people get injured more as they get older. But as a practitioner, I'm quite confident in saying it's easier to get injured as you're older. I think it's hard to contest that. Anyone that's gotten older and as they start lifting throughout their 20s into their 70s, they know you cannot do the same things anymore. You cannot do 10 1RM attempts and the next day do some other crazy stuff and think you'll be fine. There's just a lot more risk if you don't train sensibly.
So we probably have to change the way we train or the way we recover as we age, because it's not unusual to say, oh, wow, I can't do this as much anymore. Or I hate for people to give up something they really enjoy doing because they say, oh, I'm just getting older. I would love for them to find a way around it so they can still enjoy that activity, but without the injuries, and somehow modify it. So,
and work back up to that level. What you cannot do now means that we have to work up to that level. Because I also cannot squat 200 kilos. So if that's what I want to do, you have to work up to that level. And you don't do that by going to the gym and putting 200 kilos on the bar and then saying, okay, it's try or die. It doesn't work that way. You have to do it in baby steps. 1 kilo extra, 1 kilo extra. Try to hit that 5 rep max with 1 more kilo. And you repeat that 150 workouts, and then maybe you get there. And it's the same if you have trouble getting out of your chair, then you have to work up to that level before you can do bodyweight squats again and even train with a barbell again. And that is definitely realistic for most individuals. But you have to start where you currently are and gradually work up to more and more intensive and more difficult workouts.
So that's a great tip, I think, for women going through peri and postmenopause in terms of building the muscle. How do you see a woman's training schedule look like, and what should she eat, or any other lifestyle tips, things she should include in order to maintain the muscle mass, the strength, the agility, the mobility? Walk us through like a week worth of training and eating and whatever tips you got for her.
Strength training multiple times per week. That's the fundamental, I would say. Then for especially cardiovascular health, you will also benefit from up to a few cardio sessions per week added onto that. Strength training, though, in terms of bang for your buck per minute of exercise, according to the latest meta-analysis on this by Clark, actually is better for your health than cardio. And that's in particular because it improves your body composition faster. So it's more effective actually for fat loss in the long run than cardio. So if you have limited time to spend, you say up to 3 to 4 hours in the gym, 3, I would be pretty confident. I would say spend that time on strength training, because it will increase energy expenditure, build muscle mass, build strength, prevent osteoporosis, prevent sarcopenia. It will do basically everything, whereas cardio will do some things potentially better in terms of cardiovascular health, but it will not do all of these other things. So strength training is, in my view, the fundament. And guidelines are currently also changing, where strength training was seen as more of an accessory. It's now becoming mandatory in most guidelines, or like highly recommended along with cardio. And you even see a shift in strength training being more and more prominent in most official guidelines and most organizations.
But if you want to hit both of them, if you want to hit like all those areas, then like you said, it would be good to do a strength and a cardio. But if you're saying, you mentioned something that was interesting. If you don't have time, you're short on time, let's just do the strength training. But couldn't you also do sort of a Tabata, very short, intensive cardio, where it's a 15-minute, workout more or less, and then incorporate that? Would that help as well in terms of time management? If you love running the trails for an hour, okay, but if you don't have time, the Tabata, which is or sort of a HIIT training, where you're on the treadmill or a bike, you go full force for 20 seconds and then you rest for 10 or 20 seconds, and then you just do these cycles on and off for I think you can't, when you do it that intensively, it's like 10 or 15 minutes and you are exhausted. What are your thoughts on that in terms of keeping the cardio?
That can be very effective. Yes, I do some of that for kickboxing, for example, and I do bicycle sprints like that after workouts as a way to do even just one bicycle sprint after your workouts, for example, or just per day if you have a ergometer at home, has been found in research to substantially increase your health and fitness already, as long as you do it with high intensity. So I say, if you don't have time, but for most people, it's a combination of priority, time, and motivation. So for very few people, is time really the issue? And that's something that's very good to tackle also with clients and people that you consult with, because when people say, I don't have time, often they're saying, or I don't want to do this, or I don't know how to do this. And usually they can, and there are things that they can do that fit their schedule. So that's a great point. But yeah, let's assume that somebody is doing some of that if they can. And if they have time, motivation, effort, whatever, definitely add some cardio to it. Whole foods-based diet in terms of nutrition, very important. High protein intake, at least 1.6 gram per kilogram per day. I recommend 1.8 for most individuals. It's going to help with basically everything. The word protein comes from proteos, Greek, meaning of first importance. Carbohydrates and fat are not essential, other than the essential fatty acids, which is really very little. It's very easy to consume those. Carbohydrates is not essential at all. And protein is almost everything, all the enzymes, everything in your body, the building blocks, it's all protein. Protein is going to help with your skin, your hair quality, muscle mass, fat loss, absolutely everything. So protein is really, really, really important. I mean, literally, that's what the word means. So high protein, whole foods-based diet, dietary fiber is also very important. I would say that carbohydrates doesn't actually matter that much for most outcomes, unless you're like a high-level bicyclist or soccer player. Yes, then carbohydrates become useful for you. Other than that, you don't have to worry about it so much, but dietary fiber is well established for its health benefits, digestive health benefits, improves cholesterol, improves insulin sensitivity, and very importantly, signals high satiety. So it makes you very full and it reduces your appetite. So high fiber diets are very, very effective to make people eat less, even without tracking their calories. I think every 10 additional grams of fiber in the diet leads to a 5 to 10% reduction on subconscious energy intake, or ad libitum energy intake as it's called, which means that even if you're not tracking your exact energy intake, if you just focus on whole foods-based diet, high protein intake, lots of fiber, most people end up naturally losing fat without having to intentionally restrict their energy intake, because they become so full that they just stop eating. They're full, they're good. So I think it's very important to nourish your body while going into an energy deficit. And a lot of people have the idea that these things are the same, that you have to starve yourself to get lean. And that's not true at all. Unless you want to compete at 5% body fat, or in women's case, probably 12% body fat or so on stage at a figure competition, you should not have to suffer hunger. It's good to be able to suffer some hunger and to learn that hunger is not a signal that forces you to eat, but just a feeling that you may or may not want to give into. But if your diet is set up well in the manner that I just described, and a lot of more advanced things, of course, as well, you should not have to suffer hunger. That's not something that is a prerequisite to getting lean. It's mostly about making right food choices, to consume lots of nutrients, lots of vegetables, lots of fruits, to make sure that you're nourishing your body while also restricting energy intake.
So you mentioned 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So if you were 1.6. So if you're 60 kilograms, or which would be like, say, 125 more or less pounds, then that's about 9,600 grams of protein per day, right?
Yes. And women actually cannot go too wrong if they just use the guideline 100 grams of protein per day.
Yeah. So, and would you space that out for 2 or 3 meals per day, snacks, or how would you have someone do that? And how do they know what's 30 grams without weighing?
Mm-hmm. The total intake is by far the most important, but ideally you want to spread that out over at least 3 meals for optimal results. It seems that 2 meals cannot sustain the postprandial anabolism, so basically the muscle growth and the protein synthesis that occurs after the meal throughout the whole day. You need 3 meals to kind of space it out and get that 24-hour elevation and having the body have protein available, because the body cannot effectively store protein. The only way to do that is essentially to build muscle mass. That's the body's way of storing protein. That's why you need protein every day, just like something like zinc, in contrast to carbohydrate or fat, which the body can store a lot more effectively. And
so the other question was, okay, let's say somebody has no idea, what does 100 grams of protein look like?
All right, yes. In general, a good rule of thumb is that most animal sources have about 20 grams per 100 grams of food. So chicken, meat, fish, almost all of those kinds.
100 grams would be maybe about the size and thickness of your palm without the fingers, or is there another way, or a way to kind of visualize it? Or chicken breast?
Ounces, a small handful. It's really not that much. And I think if you include either an animal protein source with each meal, high quality protein source, or if you want to go vegan, then you have to, you just have to track more or look at complementary sources and the like. But for those that are not vegan, if you just have an animal protein source in each meal, you're probably good. So it's more important to know that every meal I'm going to have either dairy, eggs, meat, poultry, or fish. One of those, you're probably good. If you just consume a normal portion size, like you're not, and taking just a nibble of chicken breast, well, nobody does that. If you eat chicken breast, then you're probably eating a decent amount. If you have that 3 meals a day, one of those things is in your meals, then you're probably going to be good.
So what about, so we're still on the track of let's build muscle, burn fat, and get lean and healthy. What are your thoughts on spending money on protein powders, collagen, supplements like creatine, anything else that, that's out there?
Mm-hmm. Supplements are one of the least important things, that's for sure. There are some supplements that can help to some degree. Protein powder is very practical for some people. If you struggle to get those, to do what we just talked about, like getting an animal protein source in each meal, or you don't want to do that, then protein shakes are a convenient way to circumvent that issue. Usually 1 scoop for most women that we're talking about here, 1 scoop of protein powder, add that to a meal, and then you can have other things in a meal, and it's probably going to be fine. However, I would say that this is something that you want to do while you're improving your nutrition and your lifestyle and your food choices, because the problem with protein powder is, for one, most people just don't stick with it long term, and 2, it's not as satiating. So especially if you're traveling, for example, so let's say you're going to plane, you're 12 hours on a plane, and you need to get your protein in. You have some whey protein with you. You put that in water, you take a whey shake. Great, you got your protein covered, but it didn't fill you at all. So now you're still hungry. In fact, just a whey shake leaves many people starving. So now you still have to eat a lot. And then you're going to eat the crap food that they offer you in the plane. And then, okay, it's good that you got your protein in, but you might still have overeaten. So it's not a perfect solution, especially not for long-term fat loss and staying lean. So I would be conscious of, yes, it can be very beneficial if you can't get it from whole foods, but really try to get it from whole foods over the long run as a lifestyle change. Other than that, creatine, simple creatine monohydrate for women, 3 grams per day is effective. Doesn't matter that much when you take it post-workout or in the morning is probably ideal, but just 3 grams a day in any meal, you can mix it with anything, is going to slightly increase muscle growth and strength development from training. It's not a big effect. Recent meta-analysis actually constituted the effect is small to trivial. It's as good as it gets from anything you can get legally and safe over the counter. Creatine monohydrate is as good as it's going to get. So I would say take it. It's not that expensive. It's gotten more expensive, but it's still not that expensive. If you want to take a supplement, probably want to go with that one. Also has some health benefits, especially in elderly populations. And it can prevent also concussions, and it seems to have some benefits for the brain. So there's some very tentative research. It helps prevent things like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's. It's iffy, but it might have these benefits, and combined with all the other benefits it has, I would say that's as close to a must-have supplement as it gets. Other than that, I would say vitamin D3 is very beneficial unless you're getting lots of sun exposure so that you have a tan pretty much year round. About 4,000 IU's vitamin D3 is going to put your levels in the high normal range, which is going to massively help with the prevention of osteoporosis and in general improve well-being, also keep your hormone levels up. So that's highly recommended. Hard to go wrong with it. Toxicity doesn't happen until you're over 2-fold past the physiological range. So that's just like with B vitamins, almost not a concern. And omega-3 fatty acids. Research on those has been a little bit more iffy in the last years, but if you have a reputable brand that has unadulterated, unoxidized oils, you're not getting fish from your diet, then I would say is very beneficial to supplement that. About 2 grams per day, especially if you're at risk of cardiovascular disease, but at least half a gram of EPA plus DHA, so combined together, they have to add to at least 500 grams, and preferably 2 grams, especially if you have cardiovascular risk or disease. Helps with a lot of things, has been found to also increase muscle protein synthesis, lots of cardiovascular health benefits, really effective to lower triglyceride levels. Insulin sensitivity can improve from it. Some researchers even found that it results in fat loss, which is interesting because it still has calories, it's still fat. So yeah, just lots of good stuff, nothing magical, but it improves a lot of things a little bit. And yeah, it's a little bit more expensive as far as supplements go, but yeah, it's for your health, I would say it's a good investment.
Have you heard of the new fatty acid? There's omegas, we know omega-3 and omega-6.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of?
You mean the C15-6?
Yes, C15, or sometimes people call it fatty 15. It's a new omega in the world. Any thoughts on that?
I haven't seen that much research on it yet, that it's really something to keep an eye out on. Usually that means I'm skeptical until I've seen more research.
Well, yeah, I understand it's not as fragile because omegas can be very fragile, and once we don't know in terms of how it's been transported or created, it could oxidize. But evidently, the fatty 15 or the C15 doesn't oxidize. It's not fragile, so it doesn't break because I guess there's 15 carbon chains there, and that's all I know. But watch this space, anybody who's looking, because I think it's so brand new. There's just not enough research on it, but it sounds promising. The last couple of questions, I know you have to go, but I would love to talk about your programs, because you've got personal training programs. Anything interesting for a woman going through peri or post-menopause? Are those trainings interesting for her in terms of, I'm not sure if it's just to teach or if they actually can learn something there for themselves.
It's also for personal development. It's almost 50-50 people that do my courses for personal development versus professional development. But I would say it's very much for people that are really serious about fitness. So either you're a fitness professional or you're very serious about fitness. It's definitely also applicable to perimenopausal, postmenopausal women. We go into exactly the effects of age, pregnancy, menopause, hormone replacement therapy. All of these things are covered, so it's very comprehensive. But yeah, it's for the people that are, really want to take their knowledge to the next level and spend 10 months or at least 1 or 2 evenings per week seriously studying something or fitness for 10 months.
It's 10 months. Yeah. So it's a serious commitment. But you're coming out probably with a lot of knowledge, more than just a 3-week training or whatever. They have these stuff online. Let's mention your book too, because you have this book called The Science of Self-Control. And so my question is, what is the biggest myth of willpower and self-control?
A lot of myths about willpower and self-control. I think one of the most harmful ones is that people feel like when they fail, they have to improve their willpower and just try harder. Whereas it works much more effectively to work around your willpower and to accept how much willpower you have and how motivated you are, and then try not to rely on it. Because even if you can white knuckle discipline your way through it, through a diet, whether it's hunger or just feeling like crap all the time, you're not going to sustain that your entire life. And even if you can, it's a miserable existence. So for many people, it works so much better to avoid being hungry rather than, white knuckling through it, or to make sure that your diet feels good, you like your meals, rather than forcing yourself to eat things you don't like, because it's probably not going to last and it's not a good way to live. That's probably the number one myth, I'd say. And for most listeners, probably my book actually is much more accessible, much more user-friendly, if you will, guide to not just nutrition and all the things we talked about, but life in general, in terms of productivity, motivation, and lifestyle.
You pack a lot in that book. I was even just looking at the titles of chapters and thinking, oh my gosh, the list goes on and on. I would love to read it. It's on my list of things. I usually read books before I actually did the podcast, but I forgot to ask you to send it to me, but I did find some information on it. Anything you'd like else to say about the book? Because the book is called The Science of Self-Control, 53 tips to stick to your diet, be more productive, and excel in life. And I heard on other podcasts that this is not just a normal self-help book, but this is something totally different.
Yeah, this is very practical. So most self-help books, I think you read the book and you're like, that all made sense, but what do I do? And my book is very much, this is the science, and this is why you should do this. So it's organized essentially as a list of tips, which also hence the name, to say, okay, this is what I think you should actually do. And it's backed by science, over 500 scientific references. So I honestly think it's a really useful book for pretty much anyone. But it's not a super, I would say it's a very friendly read, but it's not like Shade Magazine, right? It's scientific information condensed in the easiest practically applicable way I could condense it.
Great. I'm going to have a link to that book in the show notes, as well as links to your Facebook and your YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Mostly it's you just looking for Menno, Menno, Henselmans. I'll have all of these links in the show notes. And you've got such great content out there. And before I let you go, do you have any last words for a woman in menopause?
I think we covered things pretty well. So yeah, I think if you listen to this podcast, you're already way ahead of the curve. And it was a pleasure talking to you.